Hi there, my name is Kelley Cody Grimm.
And I'm Max Grimm.
And we are Creative Actors Lab. What we want to do is just talk a little bit about how you can bring creativity into your everyday life. Hello everyone, it's Kelley.
And Max.
And we are back for another podcast episode. And Chef Max, why don't you introduce this?
Okay, although I could probably just yammer on about this for 20 minutes on end, but I won't. And if I do, just throw something at me.
Okay.
Kelley came up with this very unique thing that she wanted to do for a podcast, and it was about cooking as theater. And it's interesting you would say this because right now, actually, my job is actually cooking in a fine dining restaurant. I love it dearly. I really, really love it. I actually came to discover I think I have more years working in food service than I do in acting. And I've done every job in the restaurant business except own one. Before I got into theater, this is just how I'll start. I had gotten out of high school, and I got this job in this wildly popular restaurant down there. It was basically, I made Chicago-style deep dish pizza for about 6.5 years. We once did a rough estimation of the math, and we figured probably over 6.5 years, I probably made something like about 106,000 pizzas. And there was a guy, and I was like 17, 18 years old when I first started there, had some exposure to the restaurant business prior to all this. And it's a very particular lifestyle, and the people who work in restaurants, for the most part, are a very special breed. But there was this guy, I remember, his name was Randy, and he was the manager of this restaurant that started from absolutely nothing and became insanely popular to where, we would literally have people waiting at the front, out the door, and literally around the corner. There'd be a couple hundred people waiting to get into this place on like Friday, Saturday nights. It was really quite an amazing phenomenon for its first time. This is Miami Beach, Florida, in about 1980 is when this was. And I remember he said something, and it didn't really click with me until years later, but he said, basically, the restaurant business is theater. Basically what he said is that the servers and the front of house people, the bussers, the hostess, the whatever, the sommelier if you're in a fancy establishment like that, but all of the front of house people, be it you're in a pizza restaurant or you're in a Michelin star restaurant or you're at Waffle House, it doesn't make any difference. The people who are all in the front are the actors and actresses. They're the performers. The people who are behind the scenes, the cooks, the dishwashers, the expediters, all of those people, they are the backstage technicians. They're moving the scenery. They're rigging the lights. They're making the sound. Because basically without the people on stage and the people backstage, you have no play. One is honestly not more important than the other. One doesn't happen without the other. And then ultimately, the food, the menu, is the script, is the play, is the story to be told. And I think when food is really done right, it tells a story. It shows heritage and history and lineage, how things have progressed over the years, and what of one particular kind of dish, what cultural influences have come upon that dish over the course of years through geopolitical phenomenon and such things as that. It boiled down to the waiters and waitresses are the actors and actresses, the cooks and the dishwashers are the backstage crew, and the food is the story. And it wasn't really until years later after I got into theater, or maybe it was within a couple of years that I got into theater, and I started going, yeah, that's right. It just made such a large amount of sense to me. And I can't help but think of the parallels between serving somebody a meal and telling them a story. It just, for me personally, I remember when I finally got that and I was able to go into my restaurant jobs with the mentality of an actor or a director or a backstage person, or when I would go into these different theatrical productions. And I'm a restaurant person who has to, go do an audition, which is
unheard of. Nobody in the restaurant industry is also an actor.
Which is so stereotypical. But I met so many other actors, of course, working in theater, but working in restaurants also. And it's funny, if you've ever spent any time working in both, the drama that is presented to the audience or to the diner or whatever, sometimes there's a certain amount of drama going on either in the kitchen or behind the camera or behind the scenes, and it's got such a parallel to it. That serving people food that you really care about and that you really put thought into, it's the same as telling your loved ones a story.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And as somebody who waited tables for over 10 years, you are going out there, you are the face. Mm-hmm. And just like actors in a play, when things backstage are not going well, but the show must go on. You still have to go out to your tables, you've got to engage them, you've got to talk to them. Mm-hmm. You might have to explain that there's been a delay in the kitchen, you're so sorry, you're going to bring out more bread, salads are on the house, or whatever it is that you need to do. But there
grace under pressure.
Yeah, grace under pressure. And I would say there's a lot of timing involved.
Oh, God, yeah, especially kitchen-wise.
Yeah, there is a lot of timing involved. So you've got to make sure that you're not, just like you wouldn't want to jump from the beginning of the play into the third act, you've got to make sure that you're not bringing out the appetizers before the salads or the entrees before the salads and the appetizers and the drinks have come out. So, there's a certain amount of timing with that you as the server have to be in control of.
You can't tell Act 2 of the story before you tell Act 1, mm-hmm. basically. I mean, there's so many parallels in the way one, at least to me, cooking and dining and all that really is an art form. It certainly can be. It's not always presented that way, but it certainly can be. Between that and just the art and the craft and the science of the actor and the director. One thing also I think about this is, I've heard this from many other directors, and I would 1,000% agree, is that at least 80% of good directing is good casting. Mm-hmm. And you got to have the right people in the right parts. As it is with cooking, you don't necessarily have to have the best ingredients, but as a cook or as a director, you have to know how to take a tomato or a piece of beef or potatoes, asparagus, whatever, and make them the best piece of beef or piece of fish or tomatoes or asparagus or whatever with whatever ingredients you have in the kitchen. And that may be salt and pepper and canola oil, and that's it. But regardless, you use what you have. And as a director, it's like you basically try to bring out the best performance in everyone with what they're bringing to the table, what you're bringing to the table, not what you wish you could bring to the table. And it's the same thing in creating a dish. You may not have the fanciest ingredients, you may not have the saffron and the truffles and foie gras and all of that sort of thing, but it's, regardless, you've got a simple tomato, salt and pepper, and if you do it right and you pay attention and you do it with some love, that will be the best tasting tomato ever, just like it is with getting an actor's performance. You don't focus upon, what you wish they were bringing to the table or the experience that you wish they had. You meet people where they are, and that's what you work with, and that's what you respect, and that's what you make the best of it. And so often, and I'll say this, I don't know anything about acting, or I don't know everything there's to know about acting, I don't know everything there's to know about cooking, but one truth I've seen over time is that don't overcomplicate things. Don't try to add too many ingredients. Don't try to put on too many layers and too many subtext on the characters. Like don't try to put too many layers of flavor on the curry. Just keep it simple, and that's what works, and that's what resonates with people, because they can see a performance, just like with music. You've written a good song when everybody wants to sing along to it, but you've written a great song when everybody can sing along with it. Just like,
oh, that's a good point. Very good point.
You put down a dish in a restaurant. I mean, one of my personal favorite dishes in the world, hands down, especially during summer, is zucchini simmered in tomato sauce with a bit of garlic and a bit of fresh basil and olive oil. And I mean, I could eat a tub of that stuff. I love it so much, and it's the simplest food. It's the simplest preparation. It's just, zucchini and tomatoes in summer. And you just get out of the way and let them do what they do. And it's the same thing with actors. Just like, don't try to overmanage. Don't try to over-knead the dough. Don't try to, too many flavors upon top. I can remember being in plays. I remember one show in particular. It was a Shakespeare play. The director was over-directing every single rehearsal for weeks on end. It was like, okay, do this, do that. Don't do this, don't do that. And by the end of it all, and we were getting up to really close to performance time, and we're just kind of like everybody's looking back at the production and going, wow, this is about as boring gets. And so we started breaking out of that and doing our own things, and it wound up being a way better show. It's the same sort of metaphor, it's the same sort of analogy as I remember a caterer that I worked for doing Caesar salad. Simple Caesar salad, but it had to be a homemade Caesar salad dressing. There was, I swear to God, a list. I think of 20-something items to go into Caesar salad dressing. And I'm like, why do you have so many ingredients in such a simple dressing? And it's like, well, because I've gotten criticized. Some people said there's not enough lemon. Some people said there's too many anchovies. Some people said don't use this kind of mustard, use that kind of mustard. And then people have said the opposite thing, so I'm putting 2 different kinds of mustard in there. And it's like, I'm going to say this. I think the single biggest mistake I personally have ever made as an artist or any kind of creative endeavor, I don't care, acting, cooking, photography, directing, whatever, I don't care, painting, the biggest mistake I have ever made is creating for other people, for what other people, or worship what I thought other people wanted, rather than what I thought was really cool first. And I put that on a back burner to try to appease this person and that person and this person's attitude and this person's opinion and that person's opinion. And then if you try to please all the people all the time, you're going to wind up nowhere. You're going to wind up extremely frustrated with an overly complicated product that no one can figure out. And that's honestly, I think, what I think, because, I'll just say for me personally, guys, acting, if you've ever met me before, has got a very, very, very special place in my heart, as does cooking. Just the times that I've gotten up on stage and I've been able to move people, to make people laugh and make people think and cry and reflect and all that. It's the same feeling I remember I got. The first memory I ever have of cooking is for my grandfather. And I loved my grandfather. He was one of my favorite people in the entire universe. And I remember his health was starting to slip, and his doctors told him, it's like, you need to not eat so much of the junk and eat, the good stuff. And I remember, I think I was 7 or 8 years old, I was like, I'm going to make a salad for my granddad. And they kind of went, okay. So I'm in my grandfather's house, and I'm going through his refrigerator, and I'm finding carrots and tomatoes and lettuce and all this stuff. I can still remember being so happy. And my grandfather was playing, I forget the name of the musical, but it's got the song With a Little Bit of Luck. It's like, with a little bit of luck,
that's My Fair
with
Lady.
a little bit, okay, with a little bit of luck, da 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 da. And I loved it. And I just remember and I was playing that, and I'm cutting up the tomatoes, and I started dancing in the middle of my grandfather's kitchen, tossing him a salad, dancing to that song, and him getting the biggest kick out of me making a salad for him and dancing and smiling my fool ass off. And then I served it to him, and he's like, this is really good. And I figured out years later why is because, as a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine who is a barbecue pit master, says, when you get a rack of ribs from this guy, you get a chicken from this guy, and you bite into it and you go, Lyndon, man, this is delicious. And he always go, oh yeah, that's the love. You tasting the love. And it's the same thing with acting. It's the same thing with painting. It's the same thing with anything, whatever your creative endeavor, whatever it is. When people come around it and they go, man, that's really cool. What did you do? Truth of the matter is, what made it really special? That's the love. You tasted the love, baby.
No, absolutely. And I think there's also some good just management. If you're managing people as a director with actors or whatever, you've got to make sure that the people that you have in your office who happen to be, or your workplace, doesn't necessarily have to be an office, make sure that they are literally in the right parts. Because if they are not going to be where they need to be, or they're not happy where they are, that's going to, so much right now on the news is, people quiet quitting, which is like they are doing the absolute bare minimum. And then you can talk about generational work ethic, whatever, but if you're doing the bare minimum, it's because, well, maybe that's not the part you should be playing. And maybe you should have something that excites you, so where you're sitting there going, I've got to show what I'm able to do. And I think in cooking that happens a lot too. And as somebody who was a server, being able to bring out a beautiful plate and present that and be part of that production team and be able to bring out something that when the whole table went, oh, that's beautiful. I mean, the other night we were sitting in your restaurant, and the table next to us, it was my daughter's Amber's birthday, and the people next to us were also having a birthday. And what was so cool was just overhearing them as the dishes were coming out and going, oh my gosh, that is so good. Oh, did you try that? That is so good. And just that collective experience and being able to hear that and be able to report that back to Max and go, yeah, the table that was next to us was really enjoying what they were having. That is so satisfying. And as a server, because again, you're directing the audience to what they need to know. So if somebody is asking me as a server, what do you recommend? What do you think the best dishes are? You need to be able to say, rather than say, oh, everything on the menu is good. You know specifically what is good, what isn't. And you've got to work with that. And I also think improvisation in the kitchen and then for servers comes in too, because sometimes, as you have known, ingredients don't come in when they're supposed to, and so all of a sudden you have got to go, okay, well, what are we going to do with this, because not everything has come in.
Well, particularly, okay, let me say this. Actor people out there, if you're going to wind up doing any kind of food service work, you're probably going to wind up in catering at some point. Catering is a wonderful acting lesson, particularly if you're working a station, if you're working like a carving station, carving roast beef, or your shrimp and grit stations, and omelet stations are the best, guys. If you really want to learn patience and dealing with individuals, omelet stations, if you've ever done this, you'll know what I'm talking about. I can remember one time in particular, there's a place up here in North Georgia. It's called Lake Lanier Islands Resort, and I was with this staffing agency, and every once in a year they would do this. I forget if it was Mother's Day or Easter. I got pulled onto work was called flambe station, and basically what that means is, you ever see like the fancy cooks and they pour the booze into the skillet and the flame comes up and all? That was me. I've done that stuff literally hundreds of times. They put this poor little lady who didn't know how to do this in a huge dining room of like 2 services in one day of 600 people. And of course everybody sees this and, I want to go get the flaming banana dessert, but you've got to wait in line for that. At the point they came to me, it was this desperation. Have you ever done this before? And I was like, yeah. I think in that day I made, if you know what I'm talking about, Bananas Foster. If you don't, go Google it. It's a classic New Orleans fancy schmancy dessert with bananas and cinnamon and caramel and oranges and fire and ice cream. And you bring fire and ice cream into any dessert, it's got to be wonderful, right?
Yeah, it's got at least 3 of the 4 food groups.
But I lost count, I think, after about 150 of those desserts in one day. It was total theater, and every single person that walks up to you has got this little kid look on their face with their platter going, you're going to make me the really cool dessert, right? And, and it was much the same. You're dealing with these adults, and some of them very, very well-to-do people. All of a sudden, they get turned into little kids again, and they want you to tell them the story of this dessert, but rather than verbally telling them the story, you're going to show it with butter and cinnamon and brown sugar and bananas and a squeeze of orange and the caramel and the rum and whatever else, and serve it over the chocolate crepes. And it's the same thing. It comes from the same place as does storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Except rather than telling them a story, you're feeding them some food that you put the love into.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing. It uses different elements, it uses different ingredients, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, and as your acts progress, as you get your drinks out to the table, and that's Act 1, Act 2, salad,
Mm-hmm.
Act 3 is the appetizers, Act 4 is your main dish, people are going to spend longer on that act, and then finally, then there's dessert and coffee, and, just when you can present and have a successful evening with all those acts coming together, whether you're a patron or you're a waiter, that just makes a difference. But, I think we've also, on the flip side, been in situations in theater when all 5 acts are not balancing the way they're supposed to.
No.
And then, again, it's kind of incumbent on the performers, the waiters, the servers, to be able to figure out how that is. I used to work at a place called Houlihan's down in Miami.
Yeah.
And sometimes things went well, sometimes they didn't. We had a chef there that would just lose it on a regular basis.
Yeah, okay,
And if we knew that it was Chef Bill, on a Saturday night, we knew things were going to get quite, shall we say, spicy language-wise, and not so much as far as the food went.
Throwing saute pans, smashing plates.
And what's bad is when it's kind of like when you have the mishaps backstage and something gets dropped backstage and the audience can hear it. When things get dropped, when a tray of glasses gets dropped and the whole place stops and turns and hears it, it's the same sort of mortification. Again, as a server, you can improvise and pivot. I remember working at Houlihan's, and I was bending over a table, and there was like this cute little, 18-month-old little baby at one end. And so I'm leaning over, and I'm getting that, and this little hand comes out and grabs my boob because, it's a boob. Maybe we're still nursing. And so the parents were mortified.
Buffet,
It's a buffet. And the parents, like, just that, and then another table looked over, and there was just, like, silence, and they were mortified. And I just kind of looked at the little toddler, and I was doing improv at the time, and said, gee, the least you could have done was buy me dinner first. And then there was a beat or two of silence, and then people just cracked up. I got probably one of the best tips I've ever gotten proportionately, because I had a sense of humor about it. I didn't freak out. I mean, it was a baby. They didn't mean anything more by it other than, another food source here. But again, if you are a waiter, those are the things that you have to go, and sometimes you will have somebody that wants to talk to the manager, and then you've got to bring the manager out, the director of the restaurant, and just have them talk with the theater goer or the patron of the restaurant that may not be having an ideal situation. I think waiting tables and working in the restaurant business, it's not for everybody, obviously.
It's truly not. And please be kind to your servers.
Yes, and tip them well. Like, I did not know, way back in the day, in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was still waiting tables, the minimum wage for servers was $2.10 an hour. And so I'm like,
right,
okay.
Now
and
it's
so
$2.17 or something.
Yeah, it's like $2.17, and I'm like, a whole 7 cents after all this time. And what you may not know with your servers is how the IRS knows how to tax them, because sometimes there's records as far as charge cards and things like that. I think that's more up front. But when I was waiting tables, a lot of times people would pay in cash. So if they paid in cash, it wasn't always that easy to keep records on. So basically, and this is back then, I don't know if it's changed, but the IRS would base your taxation on 8% of each ticket. So what would happen was the IRS would look at your tickets and basically would tax you. So, like, let's say if you had a $100 ticket, and 8% of that would be $8, and they looked and said, okay, well, you did $800 in food that night, then that means you must have made $64 in tips, and therefore we're going to tax you 11-12% based on that. If you are stiffing your server, they are still being taxed on that 8 to 10% of what their tickets are. So they're paying taxes on money that they don't earn. So that is why I am always like super, super conscientious. I might leave 15% if I think the service isn't good, but most of the time I'm tipping way over that. If you didn't have a good time at the theater, you didn't enjoy the play, you're probably not going to come back to that theater again. It's the same way with a restaurant.
Well, okay, I want to add two things.
Sure.
Then I will shut my big mouth. In relation to that, I remember being in a play one time when it was a brand new script. It was a brand new play. It was kind of being presented for the first time, and it was very much a work in progress. And it was a pretty crazy little play. And it was the first time that I had ever worked at this particular theater. So what they were doing, because this was so new, is that after every show, they wanted to do a question and answer, and we would all get out of our costumes and come out and just sit in front of the audience and, just listen to whatever comments they had to say and questions and whatever. And inevitably, one of the bad problems about asking people for their opinions is they're going to give them to you. People would get up and say, well, I thought at this part you should have done this. Okay, the next show, that exact same thing would be changed in the script. And then we'd come along the next night, well, and some totally different person would go, at this other part of the show, I thought you should have done that rather than this. Guess what? Come in the next night. Script change, guys. This went on every single performance. It was ridiculous. And it wasn't because what these people were saying was good or bad or indifferent, just the fact that they were saying it and they were trying to be all things to all people. And it wound up just in this tail-chasing circle of futility. And there just comes a point you're not going to satisfy everyone all the time. Maybe once in a while you can, but most of the time you're not going to please all the people all of the time. And you just have to come down to like, okay, this is my decision, this is my creative decision. And we're sticking to it. Of course, listen to people. Of course, take criticism. Of course, do all that stuff. But there just comes a point where it's like, okay, the buck stops here. This is how it is. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, then go do something else. The other thing I wanted to add is something over the years, I will say for my own personal self, I've become very hypersensitive to, because I've been in both situations, both kitchen-wise and acting-wise. The thing I don't like when I go into a restaurant, and even if it's just like a family, burgers and fried chicken and any of the corporate restaurants, what I don't like is that when the plate of food comes out to me, I get this immediate sense of there have been 5 people working on this plate of food, and 5 people have in some form or fashion had their hands literally on my food, positioning the potato over here and the broccoli over here and the piece of fish down here, or the burger here and the fries there and the coleslaw there, the whatever. But not only have 5 people had their hands all over my plate of food and everyone else's, but they got some guy yelling at them, cussing at them, berating them, browbeating them, telling them that, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, dumbass, and blah, blah, blah. And it goes on like that night after night after night after night. Every time I get a plate of food in a restaurant, I know it. And I'll tell you what, I look at an actor's performance and I can take that kitchen metaphor and put it right into the director. The old thing about too many cooks spoil the soup applies in food service as well as it does in acting. And then you get some egotistical narcissist who loves to hear themselves talk, wind up getting in charge of the whole thing, and they don't have any other way but to, as soon as dinner service starts or lunch service starts, they start yelling and screaming and cussing because they don't know of any other way to do things. I remember one night I was working at a Cajun restaurant, actually a very nice Cajun restaurant, and it was Friday night, and we were busting out, and me and the kitchen crew, we had this really, really tight kitchen crew, but the owner and the chef could not speak without screaming and yelling. And I was doing stuff, and I was over on the saute station and everything, and then I turned around and I put 2 crab cakes up in the window, and they were really lovely, and everything like that, and I put them up in the window and I went, order up, and I turned around and I start working on my next dish, and all of a sudden I hear, Max, and I went, oh God, what did I screw up this time? And I went, yes. And he turns like, this is perfect. This is beautiful. And he's giving me all these really, really nice compliments, yelling at me with saliva flying out the corner of his mouth with like profanity and all this stuff as if I had just, done some horrible thing to his restaurant. He was giving me the compliment in the same voice and tone and vernacular as he hands down insults.
That is a good sign.
And I honestly, I've seen the same phenomena in kitchens as I have in acting situations, and I just know it as soon as I seen it, or as soon as I see it. And all I can say is, don't be in that situation. Don't, and particularly if you were in charge of that situation, do not treat your people that way. There's something very precious to me about being given the privilege to get up and tell someone a story and tell somebody else's story and be the vehicle and the conduit and the voice for another person's story, be it fictitious or some plate of food that has made its way down through history and antiquity and it evolved, and then somebody's going to literally take what you have created with your hands and literally put it into their body. Except the story, it goes into their mind and their heart, and it comes with the same privilege. It comes with the same responsibility.
Cool. And just, for me, I'll say, just as you were talking, I was thinking about the movie Ratatouille.
Yeah.
Which has so much of what you're saying with, like, the head chef and the yelling, and then the guy who's just supposed to be doing the soup or, doing very little. So he's getting inspiration from this little rat and then also this ghostly chef. And I think that's just a good example too, because sometimes there are people that are insanely talented, but because they don't have a long resume, basically be open to people with different experience levels and abilities and enthusiasm. And when you see that, whether you're a manager, whether you are an actor, director, whether you are a chef, manager, when you see that passion coming towards you, embrace it and say, this is something that has been sent to me. I need to do something with it. Because without that, just passion that someone might have, what they lack in experience, they make up for in passion. And that to me is a beautiful thing. When you can see that truly, truly is amazing. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for taking this time with us. And, think about the theater of restaurants and food the next time that you're out. And, look at that analogy. And also be very kind to your servers, hostesses, everybody that's working at a restaurant. They really do want you to have a good experience, as does anybody who's working in a theater. They want you to enjoy the play and have fun with it.
As in case you can't see this, I am holding a cat right now, and the last thing I'll say is it is impossible in this house for me to make a tuna fish sandwich without being harangued.
Yes.
And on that note,
yes, absolutely.
Thank you for listening. All my love, guys. Thank you so much. Again, please, all the usual, subscribe and like, and especially share this with anybody who you may think this may be helpful or interesting or thought-provoking or anything. Support us if you can on Patreon. And just keep, the reason we do this at the end of the day is because we love it and we're passionate about it, and that's enough reason to do anything right there.
Yep, absolutely. So again, thanks, and you all have a wonderful day. Until next time, we'll see you soon. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and keep in mind that you can catch us on our social media, Creative Actors Lab on Instagram and Facebook, and by the same name on YouTube. And for more on what we do, you can go to our website,
creativeactorslab.com, all one word. Thank you for listening. Stay curious, make art, not war. Much love until next time.